Hello and welcome to Yolanda Nava. Do you see what I see? In the wake of the recent midterm elections, we have a very special guest, Henry Cisneros. He is a community builder, statesman, and author. He was one of the second mayor of San Antonio, a position which catapulted him to national prominence as the cabinet secretary of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development under President Bill Clinton. He's also served as COO and president of Univision Television Network. He is currently a partner in a minority-owned investment banking firm. Welcome, Henry Cisneros. It's great to have you.
Yolanda, wonderful to be with you, see you in action once again. You haven't lost your touch, and always insightfully laying out ideas that are useful to other people. So I look forward to spending the next half hour with you.
Well, this is a wonderful opportunity. It's a perfect timing because so much has come together in recent weeks. It's been a very challenging time. But I want to go back to your beginnings, your work, and what has driven you all these years. You've had an extraordinary trajectory of achievement, of course, across decades of your life. You've served in so many different capacities, elected official offices and cabinet positions and heading a television network, and it goes on and on. What has been your driving force?
Well, that's a really good question, and I don't know whether I've ever been asked it quite that way. I guess when I look back at the principal themes in my life, they both have an association with sort of family origins. One of those themes is a deep sense of service to the country, which stems from my father's service in World War II and having grown up in a household essentially sort of military values, but also surrounded by family members who all were dedicated to trying to move the country forward, belief in the country, love for this country, flaws and all, but a deep sense of our mission is to try to make it better. And then the second theme has always been the fact that I'm a Latino living in a neighborhood that is called the poorest neighborhood in San Antonio. That's where I grew up. That's where I live today. So the combination of wanting to help the country go forward, but seeing the opportunity to open it up and make it work for everybody, those who've been marginalized, those who've been poor, bring them into the mainstream. So even though my jobs have been at different places in the American hierarchy, a mayor, a cabinet officer, a business person with an office in the Chrysler Building in New York, those twin themes are what drives me.
Really, powerful driving forces.
Yeah, they are. And there's also, I suppose, a dimension of sort of religious belief, spiritual belief. I operate from the premise that God put us on this earth to make it better because we were here. And he didn't say do it when it's convenient, do it when it's easy. He said, that's what I expect of you. And so that makes for a fairly determined, constant work program out of a lifetime. And I'm just fortunate to have been healthy and energetic enough to work at it.
Well, you have extraordinary discipline because apart from all of your professional and other achievements, political achievements, you've also authored 14 books. That takes a tremendous amount of discipline.
Well, as you know, you would know because you've authored books yourself, how much work is involved. But not all of those are books that I've authored by myself. Frequently, I've edited collections of collaboration with other people. For example, I did a book on the place of Latinos in the nation's future, Latinos in the nation's future. And that was a collection of about 12 or so colleagues that I'd worked with over the years who had thoughts about education and about housing and about community building and so forth. Also edited a book on the aging of the country's population, and particularly that aspect that is so important in their lives, which is housing. So I've edited a couple of books that were an attempt to sort of put ideas on the table that are forward looking. And then I've had a couple that I wrote myself. So, but you know, it's a way to take ideas and make them available to other people. And that, it seems to me, is the virtue of it.
Well, speaking of housing, when you were the head of Housing and Urban Development Cabinet Secretary, you were credited with creating the highest level of home ownership in the nation's history. Today, it's very, very different. And I remember that you were instrumental in helping bring about a housing development for disabled people in East Los Angeles in Gloria Molina Supervisorial District. And I was involved in that as well. And those kinds of projects are highly important. But today, young people are saying they can't afford, they can barely afford the rent, much
Yeah.
less about buying a home.
You know, I remember the day as HUD secretary when the assistant secretary in charge of FHA housing came in to see me, and he said, "Look, we've just done an economic analysis of the economy for the rest of the 1990s." This was about 1994 or so. And the president had made some decisions that seemed to put in place a good interest rate climate for the rest of the 90s and the potential for growth. A decade which turned out to be one of the strongest periods of growth in American history, as it worked out, in part fed by the tech explosion. But what he said was, we think that as a result of this strong economy, it may be possible to achieve the highest home ownership rate this country has ever achieved. We can actually move forward on that goal. At the time, the home ownership rate was about 62%. Back in the 1960s, it had been 66%. So that was the goal, go from 62 to around 66. And also, the Latino and African American home ownership rate was around 42%, well below the average. And the white home ownership at that point was something just under 70. So we put a program together to really drive home ownership, which is so critical to creating the American middle class. We know now that for most Americans, the sum total of their net worth, what they own, what they actually can say, this I own, not just wages, not just salary, but ownership, is a home. And there, it's important because then once you own a home and you have equity, you can cash that in to send a young person to college or to create a small business, any number of options. So it's wealth. It's the difference between income, which is outflow, if you will, inflow and outflow, versus wealth, something you actually can call net worth. And housing is critical to that. So we went to work trying to increase the home ownership rate. And at the end of the decade of the 90s, we had indeed achieved the highest home ownership rate in American history. And the Latino and African American home ownership went from 42 to right at 50%, right at 50%, still much lower than others, but a dramatic increase. It is true that things are very different today because we went through a great recession and a lot of people lost their homes. It's also true that the pandemic has been damaging and changed the trajectory of home ownership. But today, unfortunately, housing is we're going through a housing crisis. There's not one major city in America where a family earning the minimum wage can afford the rent on a two-bedroom apartment. In Austin last year, rents went up 40%, 40% increase in rent on people who were renting. So that just contributes to the eviction rate, and it contributes to instability in housing. And then not enough is being produced. So the demand is outstripping the supply, further driving up the price. And the same is true for entry-level home ownership. We know now that many young professionals are not going to be able to enjoy the life their parents did with respect to housing and therefore with respect to wealth because they're locked out. of the entry-level house. There's just not enough of them, and the price is too high. So this is a serious problem for the country, and it's much more than just bricks and mortar and a house and the pride of having a house. It's the mechanism by which we create wealth and a middle class.
And that's very important. It's greed seems to be a factor. The Me Too philosophy that has proliferated since 2015, that is hopefully going to shift back to some kind of normal, if we can expect that. But we have to have those opportunities available for people, and
Absolutely.
to create equitability of distribution.
Yeah. I saw a study done by a group called the Demos Institute in New York that it was called Sustaining the Middle. And it was about how we achieved a middle class in the years after World War II. And this study concluded there were three factors. One of them was the GI Bill, which made it possible to get people to get an education. Troops came back from the war, they got college degrees, and all of that contributed to the technological advances of the 60s and 70s. Secondly, minimum wage. We had strong minimum wage and labor protections. So we were able to lift people out of poverty onto the ladder that began their climb to the middle class. And thirdly was home ownership and the equity that it allows people to build up. That was a fantastic period for America. You might even say, the strongest, most robust growth in our American middle class. Now we're seeing the hollowing out of the middle class. But we know some of the things that have to be done. We just haven't managed the political will to actually do them.
Well, we've just had an election which many feel has managed to preserve democracy, and we should be able to get more of these initiatives through Congress and through the Senate. Do you think there is a pathway back to some kind of sustainability and supportability for growth of middle class people that includes everybody?
I do. I'm optimistic, and hopefully it's not a false optimism. But I have found in my life that one of the great differentiators between leaders and the great differentiators between people actually is the degree of optimism. You wake up in the morning and the glass is half empty, and you approach the day with the negativism that engenders, or do you approach the day with a glass that's half full, as Yolanda, you do better than almost anybody that I know, and whatever obstacles, whatever barriers, you're just determined to overcome them. It is a given that you're going to try to overcome them. Maybe not always successful, but you're going to try to overcome them.
Well, I like the idea of the glass is refillable.
That too. So I do believe that out of this closeness of the election, on the important things that are before the country, we're going to find, and I'm predicting this, that the middle of both parties will understand they're a working majority if they choose to be. If they leave the craziness on the sides, the extremes, maybe listen to them. They may have a point to make that's valid, but the common sense core, the middle, can get some things done that need to be done. For example, right now we're facing the issue of the debt limit, which has to be passed in order for the country to be able to maintain its credit rating and so forth. The war in Ukraine, Lord knows we need to stand with Ukraine and not be party to watching them fall under the boot of Russian aggression, and so many other things that need to be done, like the housing we were just talking about. I have to believe there is a middle there that's big enough to answer the call from the American people in this election, which is, guys, put the craziness aside. Let's get done things that need to be done. I believe that.
Well, we hope so. You've had experience also in media as the head of the Univision Television Network, and I'm wondering what your take is on why the perception. We've had so much negative vitriol and hate talk against, Mexicanos, Latinos in this country since 2015, and we're still suffering from it. Why is it that the media and the powers that be do not see that Latinos and immigrants are a vital contribution to this nation's economy? We are a $2.7 trillion market, economic force, soon to surpass the economy of France. Why aren't we seen as the contributing people that we are?
Well, first of all, let me agree with you that that's who we are. We are a very hardworking, dedicated people looking to the future, willing to sacrifice today so that our children can do better. Deep devotion, spiritual devotion, commitment to families. Those are sort of the basic American values that in many instances have been eroded, we face populations that are just tired of the striving. And yet here's a population that's hungry, fresh, young, ambitious, and strivers. So I think I've said many times, what America doesn't realize is that the Latinos among us are a key to a vibrant American future. They absolutely are. It's the nature of immigration. It's the nature of refreshment with young populations, people who still believe in the American dream, even though others have said it doesn't exist. Our best days are behind us. These are people who can't afford to believe that because they're staking their whole lives and their children's lives on the American future, and they're willing to do their part to make it come through. Why don't Americans understand it? I don't know. But I suspect it has to do with being blinded by some ancient prejudices, or people can't get past the fact that people have different skin color or different last names or different accents, or can't get over it when it's so patently clear that these Latinos bring the essential dynamics, ingredients, energy, force that the country needs. An infusion of that Latino culture would be a great thing for America.
Well, it's all in the frijoles. Those are the first that we bring into this country.
Exactly.
Something so simple.
That's a nice subtle plug for your last book.
No, that's the first.
Your first book.
But you're in that first book. You're one of the wonderful contributors to that book, and I remember the story about your grandfather Romulo, and the passion for contribution and service and community and patriotism that that he provided you with, and this is what's so important in the country. That's why I really flummoxed by this resistance to who we are and what we do.
Well, you'll be proud to know, Yolanda, that at this very moment, I'm sitting in my office in the building that my grandfather built as a print shop in 1949. And it's solid as a rock, built strong as a bomb shelter. And we've enhanced it. And when the printing shop played out, he died at 93. He had come to work on a Friday, went to the doctor on a Saturday, and died on a Sunday at 93. So he worked until the last Friday afternoon that he possibly could. But he had built this wonderful print shop that was one of the largest union print shops in San Antonio. And when when printing changed and people were no longer going to print shops to get wedding invitations and school graduation announcements and school football programs, the building became empty, and I helped the family bail it out of tax obligations and converted it into a modern office building. And that's where I'm sitting right this minute, surrounded by the blood, sweat, and tears that my grandfather and uncles put into this place.
That's beautiful. Well, you had a lot of blood, sweat, and tears across the decades of your life, and now you have a new book out, The Texas Triangle. Talk about that.
Well, really it's something that fascinated me way back when, even in the years that I was mayor in the 1980s, that it was clear to me that San Antonio was linked to the future of San Antonio was linked to this really fortuitous development that we've got, which is one of the more dynamic urban complexes in the world. And I use the words advisedly, in the world. Dallas Fort Worth in the north of the triangle, Houston in the southeast corner of the triangle, and San Antonio and Austin in the southeast corner of the triangle, or rather southwest corner of the triangle. So you have Houston number 4 in population in the country, San Antonio number 7 in population in the country, Dallas number 9, 9 ranked city in the country, and Austin number 10. 4 cities ranked among the 10 most populous in America in this geographic triangle, sort of feeding off of each other, trading with each other, sharing resources. It's a pretty powerful, I think, piece of geography for the future of America. And I think it's going to be notable in the world.
And how will that play into you've done so much advocacy work for Latinos and immigrant population,
Yeah.
because we are the drivers. We couldn't
Yeah.
have gone through COVID without those frontline people that were putting
Well,
food on our table, and the truckers and everything else.
that's a good question. The core of all of those areas that I just described is increasingly Latino.
Mhm.
And it is becoming the dominant population, those cities are, in Texas. So when you ask me, how's this going to work out? Well, it's going to work out for the people because they're going to be riding the rocket ship of some pretty dynamic economies. So there's going to be some fortunes made. There's going to be some small businesses created that grow into large businesses. And there's going to be lots of jobs and encouragement for younger people to get an education so they can be part of that dynamic. So it works for us. And I think what it will mean for Texas is that what we have once thought of as the land of ranches and oil wells and wide open spaces is going to be one of the more dynamic urban complexes in the world. And Latinos are going to be in position to ride that rocket ship. And so it feeds kind of the best model that I like, that I hope for our country, which is what I always believed when I was mayor and what I used to share with President Clinton, a two-fisted approach. One, we do the hard-headed things necessary to keep our economy growing, creating opportunity. Do what we need to do in terms of infrastructure and water and power and roads and mobility and all of those. But the other fist in its two-fisted effort hits with equal impact, and that is education, training, more inclusive and open strategies, et cetera. And that's kind of in the American model. We haven't done enough on the latter, on the training, on the education in this new era. The new skills necessary in the computer age, for example, the kind of computer literacy that's needed, and digging deep into populations and finding people who have given up and bringing them back into the workforce, and dealing with the population of people who are older. For example, we have this aging tsunami where people need more help and assistance. So I think we're looking at the potential to put in place some models that can serve the whole country.
It's important to do that. A few months back, I interviewed Herman Gallegos, who at 91 is still going strong and was one of the founders of Hispanics in Philanthropy.
I remember Herman well.
You've served on a number of corporate and foundation boards and nonprofit boards. How do we get the foundations to bring more Latinos into the mix? Because we're receiving as an overall group less than 4% of all the resources that foundations have, and they have gazillions of dollars. And if those could be put into education and infrastructure in these other areas to create new productivity and new opportunity and new educational opportunities to move up the ladder, that would be a fantastic solution.
Well, that's a huge oversight presently in our country. And it goes back to your earlier point about how can Americans not understand and comprehend the treasure that we have in this Latino population that wants to contribute and wants to grow and everything would work to enhance the American economy and American progress. But you're right, our foundations are not doing enough. Many of them are still sort of in an older model, which is a strictly black-white dichotomy in the American system, as opposed to something more multicultural as a reality and dealing with it. So we're a little bit behind the times in terms of recognizing. I mean, the first order of business was to recognize inequity in our society, and it's appropriate that we focused on sort of the black-white dichotomy. It was the most severe and the clearest, but we're now into a more complex reality of a mix of immigrant mixes that unless we want to create a new permanent underclass, yeah, we have to recognize and deal with. That means people on boards of foundations and staffing of foundations. It means people on running some of the nation's largest nonprofit. It's happening. It's happening steadily. Um, but I think as a community, the Latino community needs to make sure to keep the focus and keep the impetus, which your people like you and your observations and your encouragement are invaluable. And you've always had those instincts, but I think what makes them particularly powerful now is, given your state of life, you have a chance to really state them with power, the power of experience, the power of conviction. And thank you for doing that.
Well, it is a pleasure to do that, and it's been wonderful to have you here with us. And I want to see so much more in terms of how we connect all of these dots so that we can have more engagement at the foundation level, more education in terms of history and awareness of the importance of our contributions throughout the country, Southwest in particular, but now throughout the Southeast and all the way up to, Maine and north.
Yeah.
That we do have a great deal to offer, and we have to get out of this kind of East Coast Beltway mentality. It doesn't know a clue about the fact the Spanish were in the Americas for 100 years before the Jamestown.
Yeah. Well, I remember the days when you had cultural responsibilities in New Mexico, which is in some sense a kind of a laboratory of multiculturalism. It's so in the DNA of the state, and good things can be done to create a sense of pride and self-knowledge and determination forward. And New Mexico is a smaller state, so it's possible to really do some powerful things there. But then the trick is to export them and replicate them on a larger scale in a lot of other settings. So if you could imagine, the lessons that you were extending in New Mexico being applied in the 800,000 student Los Angeles school system, for example, that's the task before us.
Well, we have a lot of good things that are coming around the bend. In California, there was a measure passed last year and 2 years ago goes into effect to be implemented to have require ethnic studies as a requirement for graduation from high school, and that's going to help create.
I think that's just common sense and smart. Everybody needs to have an understanding of the realities with which we work, and they are the new realities. So I remember going years and years ago to speak at the invitation of a university in Minnesota. I think it was Mankato State. And I said to the students and to the faculty, you would do well to understand the dynamic that exists in the rest of the country. That area of Minnesota is one of the least heterogeneous areas of the state, very, very homogeneous. And I said to them, because you're gonna go from here to get a job in Chicago, and you're not going to recognize, the reality of what you work with in terms of your coworkers, the people who you supervise, the people who have positions above you. If you're not learning these things as part of your education, even now.
And you've more recently become involved. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
become involved in investment banking. You're part of an investment, minority-owned investment banking firm. How does that play into what needs to happen economically for our people?
Well, for a good 20 years, I've been involved in raising institutional capital for urban needs. The first company that we founded in Los Angeles was dedicated to building housing, workforce housing, not upscale, not subsidized, but for working people. And we've had a good run with that company. I've also worked in public finance, raising capital for municipal projects, all kinds of water, power, airport, uh, and other things in the municipal sphere. And now raising capital with our latest company and funds to deploy into needed infrastructure. So literally today is a big day because we are closing on a almost $400 million investment in terminals 6 and 7 at JFK Airport in New York. So it's taught me a good deal about uh, the capital markets of the United States, how they work, and how we can deploy them for good. And obviously, that is a critical area for minorities, people of color, to be involved because we all know those are the markets that make the economy work. And it's the last frontier for inclusion. So many other sectors of American life have worked at trying to be inclusive, but the money markets don't think that way, don't work that way. I've been very fortunate to be working with minority folks in minority-owned companies striving to establish their place in the world of capital investment, debt, financial realities. And I'm proud to say I think we're beginning to make some progress, but only slowly and small. There's much more to do. But that's in the rubric along the route of where the country needs to be going. And we're trying and going in the right direction. Yolanda, it's wonderful to spend time with you as always. And I want to thank you for this project that you're involved in, talking to people, trying to understand their realities, and also, as you do so well, and you said, connect the dots, find the patterns, understand what this all means, and can't wait to see what the fabric you weave out of this will look like.
Well, Henry Cisneros, it's been a pleasure and an honor to be with you today. Thank you so much for joining me on Yolanda Nava. Do you see what I see? And to the audience, I would love to say, just urge you to pick up copies of Through the Dark and It's All in the Frijoles that we mentioned earlier in the interview during your holiday gift giving. Our powerful culture and inspirational stories and life-changing opportunities and teachings that are very important. And
Yolanda,
next month, yes.
Please know that we need your voice. There's no other voice like it because no one has had the experience that you've had or demonstrated the courage that you have. And I mean, there's a lot of people who've demonstrated great courage, but yours has been of its own variety and impressively powerful. So please never stop thinking and sharing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Henry, very much. And be sure and tune in next month to our December edition of Yolanda Nava. Do you see what I see? We'll be joined by documentarian, director, and author Jesus Trevino. Tune in next time. See you then.